Voices in the Dark. 4 True Ghost Stories. Chapter 1. The Delivery. In a quiet little town where nothing ever really happened, 12-year-old Ben had just earned enough trust to stay home alone for the night. His parents, still young and lively, left him with pizza money and promises to be back by morning. The house, warm and familiar, buzzed with the sound of his old PlayStation 2. Ben was mid-mission in his favorite James Bond game when the doorbell rang. The pizza guy looked off. His beard was long, wild, his eyes never settled. As Ben took the pizza and turned to close the door, the man leaned slightly and asked, "You alone here?" Ben hesitated, mumbled something about his parents coming home soon, and shut the door quickly. He didn't think much of it until a few hours later the doorbell rang again. Only this time it was late. The voice on the other side wasn't familiar. A man claiming he needed a phone, begging for help. But there was no car in the driveway, and no footsteps before or after. When Ben crept up the stairs, he saw the silhouette of a man pressed against the glass, watching, waiting. It got worse. There were footsteps downstairs, a door opened that should have been locked. Ben, paralyzed, crouched under his parents' bed with the cordless phone trembling in his hand as he whispered updates to his mother. The man was inside the house now. Footsteps creaked on the floorboards, moving between rooms, searching. The police arrived just in time. They never caught the intruder. But when Ben's parents followed up at the pizzeria, the delivery man, Phil, never came back from his run. The manager refused to speak. The business closed a month later. Ben never stayed home alone again. Chapter 2. The Man Behind the Glass. Years later, in a forested region of North Idaho, a different boy, Logan, lived with his parents in a house that looked like it belonged in a movie. Gym, theater, bar room, decks overlooking miles of thick wilderness. It should have felt like paradise, but the silence in those woods wasn't peaceful. It was watching. Logan had his girlfriend over. They watched Gladiator, drank cheap beer, and laughed about nothing. But as midnight crept in, Logan felt a tightness in his chest, something primal, an animal sense that he and his girlfriend were not alone. After she left, he went to shut off the lights downstairs. That's when he saw the man. Filthy, smiling, a knife in hand, tapping gently on the movie room glass, not trying to get in, just smiling. The same man followed him to the next room, a slow stalk from one window to the next, never blinking, never breaking eye contact. His parents returned just in time. His dad grabbed a rifle, but the man had vanished into the trees, leaving only cold footprints that circled the entire house. Then came the nightly tapping, sometimes from the roof, sometimes under the window, but always the same rhythm, the same presence. Logan stopped sleeping. One night, shotgun in hand, Logan stepped onto the deck and saw the man again. Same grin, same knife. He fired a warning shot. The man slowly backed into the woods, still smiling. That was the last night Logan ever saw him, but not the last time he felt watched. Chapter 3: Cabin Hollow. Spring break. A rental cabin in South Carolina. 6 college friends. The recipe for beer-fueled bliss. The cabin was isolated, deep in the woods, barely accessible by car. Something felt off from the start. The listing online made it seem rustic and charming, but the real thing was old, moldy, stained. They brushed it off. That night, something watched them from the woods. One of them, Jake, woke up around 4 a.m. to a soft tap, tap, tap on his window. What he saw froze his blood. A man standing inches from the glass, face pressed against it, eyes wide and unblinking, shirtless, breathing heavily, just staring. Jake whispered for his friend Matt, who rushed in just in time to catch a glimpse of the man before he disappeared into the dark. Footprints in the morning told a more horrifying story. Bare, human tracks circling the cabin, every window, even the one above the second-floor shower. But they stayed. The next night, the man was inside. Matt caught sight of him standing in the kitchen, staring at the fridge like he'd never seen one before. His back was covered in long, fresh scratches, as if he'd been crawling through brambles. By the time they flipped the light on, he had vanished. No broken locks, no sign of forced entry, just the open back door. They fled that night. The police downplayed it. The rental listing vanished. They never found the man, and none of them ever returned to that state again. Chapter 4: The Forest Doesn't Forget. Ben, Logan, and Jake had never met each other. Different states, different years, different lives. But something had stitched their stories together. A thread of cold silence, an imprint of eyes watching from the dark, and a sense that none of their homes were truly safe. Ben, now in his late 20s, worked nights at a security firm just outside of town. He rarely talked about what happened to him when he was 12. His parents had moved after the incident, but Ben had returned to the same town as an adult, drawn back by something he couldn't quite explain. He told himself it was nostalgia, closure, but deep down he knew something had been left unfinished. It started again with the letters. No return address, no stamp, just small hand-folded notes left in his mailbox or sometimes wedged under his windshield wipers. The first few made little sense. You remember me. You saw through the glass. I'm still outside. Ben assumed they were pranks, but the handwriting was familiar, scratchy, uneven, just like the old signature scrolled across the receipt from the pizza place that night long ago. One morning, he found a note tucked inside his front door frame. This time, it had a drawing, a childlike sketch, a house, a stick figure in the window, another one outside, holding what looked like a knife. Ben didn't go to the police, not at first. Instead, he installed cameras, 4 of them, motion sensitive, night vision enabled. He didn't catch anything on them for 3 weeks. And then, one night, just past 3:17 a.m., a figure appeared. Too far for facial detail, but the outline was unmistakable. A man. standing completely still at the edge of the frame, watching the window. Logan had tried to move on. After the encounter with the smiling man in the woods, his parents sold the house. They claimed it was too much land, too far from the city. But Logan knew better. He had nightmares every few months. The man at the window, that grin. Sometimes he'd see the shape of him in reflections or catch a glimpse in a store mirror. He would turn, heart-pounding, but no one was ever there. But it was real. He was sure of it. His therapist said it was a stress reaction, possibly trauma-induced hallucination. But Logan had never hallucinated the smell. Wet wood, rotting leaves, a metallic tang like blood on iron. It came back one October. He was living in a small apartment above a laundromat, a temporary setup while he worked contract IT jobs. Nothing fancy, but safe, controlled. Until one night, he returned home to find his front door unlocked. No sign of break-in, nothing stolen, but the deadbolt was undone. On his kitchen table, in the exact center, was a single glove. Old, leather, and covered with scratches. Next to it was a photo. It was of him, taken through a window. In the photo, he was asleep. Jake tried harder than anyone to forget. He dropped out of college the year after the cabin incident. His grades had plummeted. He stopped sleeping. He moved to a different state, changed his name on social media, and refused to keep in touch with anyone from the trip. But the dreams didn't stop. They started with tapping, always tapping. Then the vision of the pale man at the window, his eyes black and unblinking. Then one night, he woke up with dirt in his bed. Not just dust, real dirt, pine needles, damp soil, a single twig snapped in half. His therapist said he'd likely tracked it in without noticing, sleepwalking maybe. But Jake knew. He had locked the windows. He had checked them 3 times, and still, something had been there, watching. Something connected them. Not a man, not a spirit, but something in between. Ben began to research. He found online forums, half-abandoned threads about black-eyed men in the woods, silent watchers, tapping sounds that followed victims across states. Most were dismissed as urban legends or creepypastas, but he noticed a pattern. All the sightings happened in rural or isolated areas. All involved someone staring through glass. All victims reported the same smell: wet wood, old iron, and decay. Ben created a private blog, a place to document it all. He called it The Man Behind the Glass. He shared his story, carefully redacted, and that's when Logan found him. A random Google search for keywords from one of his recurring dreams brought him to Ben's blog. They started emailing, then talking, then planning. Jake was harder to find, but Ben tracked him through a mutual friend on Facebook. He was working at a lumber yard in Oregon under a new name. When they reached out, Jake didn't respond. Until one day, he did. The email had no subject line, just one sentence. He's back. The 3 men agreed to meet. A neutral place, a cabin Ben's friend owned up north, ironically not far from where Logan had grown up. They arrived in late fall, just as the trees were beginning to turn skeletal and the cold sank into the soil. They brought weapons, flashlights, cameras, notebooks. Each of them wore a small recorder clipped to their chest. For the first 2 days, nothing happened. They shared stories. They tried to piece together timelines. They stayed inside at night. But on the third night, the tapping returned. This time, it was on every window. They checked the cameras. They caught nothing. But when they woke up the next morning, there were prints in the frost. 3 sets, circling the cabin. But the prints weren't from boots or bare feet. They were handprints, as if something had crawled around the house on all 4s. Ben began hearing voices at night. He recorded them. At first it sounded like wind, but when slowed down, they could make out words. "Let me in. I'm still watching. Your eyes lied, but your heart knew." Jake swore he saw something move between the trees, too tall for a person, too fast for any animal he knew. Logan saw lights flickering between the branches like reflections off glass. Then the power went out. Their phones died next, and the backup generator failed. They were completely cut off. That night, they took turns keeping watch. Jake's shift was around 3 a.m. At 3:17, he whispered into the recorder, "He's at the window." The audio cut to static. In the morning, Jake was gone. The front door was open-ended. No blood, no struggle, just the recorder left on the porch. Ben and Logan searched for hours, but the forest swallowed everything. Tracks disappeared. The frost melted. They stayed one more night. Logan swore he saw Jake in the trees, but when he ran toward him, he found only footprints and a note pinned to a tree with a rusted knife. "I know your names now." They left before dawn. They never spoke again. Ben deleted the blog. Logan moved overseas. But sometimes they both hear tapping. And when they look out the window, the glass is empty. But it feels like someone just moved. Chapter 5. The Hollow Watchers. Ben hadn't spoken in days. After Jake vanished, Logan barely managed to drag him away from the cabin. He'd gone completely silent during the final stretch of the drive, staring into the rearview mirror like he expected someone to be following them. But there had been nothing. No headlights, no howling wind, just the cold whisper of trees falling away behind them. They each returned to their lives, fractured and frayed. Logan moved to London. Ben, somehow, ended up back in his old apartment above the laundromat. He couldn't explain why. Maybe because it felt like the last place where things made sense. He rarely left the apartment, afraid the Watchers would follow him again. But they never left. Not really. Then, one night, a message appeared on his bathroom mirror. The words were written in something too thick and red to be steam. He never left. In the Scottish Highlands, Logan tried to rebuild. He started hiking, photographing quiet fog-draped moors to convince himself the world was still beautiful. But even there, far from the woods of his youth, something followed. He began noticing strange things. Sheep carcasses torn open and arranged in circles, hollowed-out stones stacked near his windows, a strange knock, knock, knock on the upstairs ceiling, even when he was the only one home. Then, one morning, Logan found a broken camera on his doorstep, one of the exact trail cams they'd used at the cabin. Inside the battery case was a note. "I remember your breath on the glass." He moved again. It was Ben who got the real answer. He joined a forum for fringe folklore researchers. Most of the members were conspiracy theorists and role players, but one user, Nightroot, posted a story that chilled him. They spoke of the Hollow Watchers, spirits born from forgotten places, not ghosts, not demons, but echoes of something older, drawn to isolation, silence, and windows. They are what comes when you look too long into the dark, Nightroot wrote. They live behind glass, and they hate being remembered. Ben reached out. The user never responded, but 2 days later, a package arrived at his apartment. No return address. Inside was an old leather-bound field journal, its pages filled with cryptic drawings and observations. The last page read, "If one of them takes someone, you must go where they vanished. Only there can the tether be broken. Only then can they sleep." Ben knew what he had to do. He called Logan. Despite everything, Logan answered. "Jake still out there," Ben said, his voice low, "or what's left of him." They agreed to meet. This time, they wouldn't just run. They would go back to the cabin. Not to hide, not to escape, but to fight back. But they didn't return alone. Logan had made contact with another survivor, a woman named Alina, who had fled a similar encounter in Norway. Her story was almost identical: tapping windows, vanishing footprints, a face pressed against glass. But her brother hadn't escaped. He was taken in 2015. She'd spent years studying old Nordic folklore to track what she'd begun calling mirror-bound spirits. Together, they formed a plan. They would return to the forest. They would try to pull Jake back, and they would end the Hollow Watchers. The cabin looked worse than before. Rot had begun to eat away at the porch. The windows were filthy. There were no signs of wildlife, no birds, no insects, just a ringing, unnatural quiet. Ben set up cameras again, though part of him didn't believe it would matter. Alina poured salt in a perimeter ring. Logan prepared sigils from her journal, chalked carefully around each entrance. And they waited. The sun dipped below the horizon. The forest held its breath. And the tapping began. It came from every wall, all at once. Not just the window, the ceiling, the floors, the kitchen cabinets. Even the mirror in the bathroom began to tremble. Ben ran to the basement. There, in the old movie room, the wall behind the screen had split open. A hidden passage. It hadn't been there before. He called the others. Logan held up the shotgun. Alina gripped a candle and a brass pendant shaped like a tree with an eye in the center. The tunnel was tight, earthen, descending. It smelled of rot and old breath. At the bottom, the walls opened to a crude stone chamber. In the middle sat Jake, eyes open, not blinking, not human. He stared through them like they were made of smoke, and then he smiled. Alina whispered prayers in a language neither Ben nor Logan recognized. Jake didn't move, but behind him, in the shadows, figures began to appear. They weren't men, not really. Too tall, too long. Their faces seemed pressed flat, like they were being viewed through glass. Their eyes were deep holes, glowing faintly. The Hollow Watchers. Alina stepped forward. She dropped the pendant into the circle drawn at Jake's feet. He screamed. The watchers recoiled. The ground trembled. Walls cracked. Logan grabbed Jake, pulling him upward, screaming his name. Jake didn't respond, but he followed, like something inside him wanted to leave. Ben poured salt at the entrance. The figures shrieked, distorted and high-pitched. The tunnel collapsed behind them. They ran. Jake didn't speak for a week. Then, one night, he told them everything. He hadn't been dreaming. They'd taken him, and he'd seen dozens more, people who disappeared without a trace, all trapped behind the glass. Echoes of their worst moments played on loop. They feed on loneliness, Jake whispered. They hate warmth. They hate noise. They hate being seen. Ben lit a fire in the yard. Together, they burned the journal and the pendant and the last letter Ben ever received. The tapping didn't return. They don't speak often now, but sometimes in the silence of a long night, they send a single message. Glass is clear, meaning no eyes watching. Not tonight. But deep in the forest, where the ground split and a scream once echoed, something is rebuilding, waiting, because the hollow watchers never sleep, and glass never forgets.